There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through, and some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain. Ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open. And tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The night was as still as a tombstone. The clock read 3:45 a.m. when I dialed into the midnight frequency, hoping to drown out the emptiness of my old basement with some ghost stories. Ashland's streets were empty and silent, save for the distant hum of traffic. My name is Mark, and this was supposed to be a routine night, but as fate had it, I found myself whispering into an abyss. I was rummaging through boxes in the forgotten depths of my father's old house when I stumbled upon a dusty metal trunk. Inside, amidst broken glass and yellowed documents, were half a dozen reels of magnetic tape untouched since before I was born. Curiosity piqued. I carried them upstairs to our living room, where an old cassette player stood like a hulking sentinel. The silence in the house seemed to grow louder as I plugged it in and wound up the tape. The first voice that greeted me was my father's, calm yet distant, as if speaking from another world. "Mark, you should be here with me." He sounded frail, his breath caught in a long-drawn exhale. My hand trembled slightly as I switched on the player, the room enveloped in a thick layer of static. As I listened, I found myself talking back to him, half joking and half afraid. "Dad, what did you find down there? Why didn't Mum ever mention anything about these tapes?" The silence stretched out like an eternity before me, broken only by the soft crackling of the old machine. I had always known my father had his eccentricities, but this felt different. As I continued to speak, the static began to take on a peculiar rhythm, a faint heartbeat almost, or maybe a whispering wind that grew louder with each word I uttered. The tapes were responding, and I could feel the edges of my own sanity beginning to fray. "Tell me," I said, my voice growing more desperate. "What was out there in the basement? Did you see something?" The tape hissed, and then a new voice spoke. It wasn't my father's. It was too low and gravelly for that. This voice whispered softly, just loud enough to be clear over the static. "Leave them," the voice said. "You will only bring trouble." I laughed, but the laughter felt hollow even as I heard it echo back at me through the speakers. The room filled with a cold chill, and my fingers played nervously with the edge of the tape reel. Then, without warning, the response shifted to something more urgent. "Don't listen," the voice said again, this time with an unmistakable urgency. "The basement," it answers back now. And as I stared at the machine in horror, my own whispered question hung in the air. "Who's there?" The silence that followed was a heavy weight, a suffocating nothingness that left me gasping for breath. In that moment, the tape player stopped. The basement tapes were gone, swallowed up by their own static. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever was down there in the depths of my father's old house had just started speaking back to me. And it hadn't finished yet. It's 2 a.m. on a Friday, and I am exhausted from my graveyard shift at the local paper mill. The factory hums quietly around me, its rhythmic clatter masking any sounds of the outside world. It's just me and the ghostly warmth of an old coffee in hand when I reach for the answering machine on my small apartment table. I set it to record but had forgotten to hit the play button since moving back home a few months ago. That was until now, as I flip through the messages left by the few neighbors who still call this out of the way address. The first two are mundane, boring reminders and chit-chat, but then I hit pause. The third message is different. It's not even on voicemail yet, but my house phone suddenly cuts dead. My breath catches in my throat as a shiver races down my spine. I unplug the answering machine from the wall and plug it directly into my landline. A faint static hiss fills the silence, and I can hear nothing. No one ever calls this late, not even my parents. I hit play again. The first few seconds are just a dial tone, but something catches in the static, a faint whisper. Are you there? It's so quiet it could be imagined. But then, without warning, the message begins to play. Hello, you have reached the Smith residence. My name is Emily. Please stay on the line. This is important. If anyone ever asks if I'm still here, tell them not to call for a while because they won't hear back. The voice is soft, almost breathy, like it's whispered from another room. The message repeats itself twice more before cutting off abruptly in mid-sentence. A third time, the message starts over with that same pause and then, they'll know, I'm here. My heart races as I hit play a fourth time. This time, the message cuts out entirely before any words can be made out. The answering machine clicks to life, playing static, and then nothing. I hang up, my hand trembling slightly, fingers dancing over the buttons of the phone in an automatic gesture that feels far too familiar. In the silence, I can hear my own breathing and the distant hum of the factory. But then, a new message begins. Is anyone there? This is Emily again. Please listen carefully. It's important. The message trails off, and when it doesn't finish, I hit record just as a low, almost inaudible voice whispers, they won't hear. My eyes widen. The hairs on my arms stand up. I can feel something watching me from the darkness. Something that isn't human. The phone vibrates suddenly in my hand. A missed call. Panic sets in as I reach for it, but when I see the number, I freeze. It's unlisted. An out-of-state number. No. A number with no name attached to it. It dials again and again, each ring stretching into an eternity. And just when I'm about to hang up, one more message plays. Please listen. The line is dead because they won't hear the rest of my story. The static returns, but this time, a faint whisper echoes. They'll know. I'm here. The baby monitor picked up the news. Late breaking. In black and white. The static was faint but clear, carrying the voices of people I didn't recognize. They spoke not of today's headlines or tomorrow's weather. They were talking about events that happened before my parents were even born. Breaking out of the station, a man said, his voice urgent yet strangely distant. Homicide in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City, Utah. My mother murmured from her armchair where she sat up straight, her eyes wide with concern. That's not possible. She clicked the channel down, but the static had already started to carry the story again. There was a murder last night at an old house on Main Street. The police say it's premeditated. No struggle, no sign of forced entry, nothing. My father turned off the monitor with a frustrated sigh. It must be a mistake, he muttered, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. The news continued as if oblivious to their dismissal. A baby was found inside. It's too early for details. I heard my father's breathing quicken behind me. He didn't speak, but the fear on his face told its own story. My mother's grip on the arm of her chair tightened until white knuckles showed through her pale skin. The static held onto the story like a hand wouldn't let go. Detectives speculated could be linked to old secrets. My father turned toward us, eyes wild and frantic. Shh, he hissed, but my ears were already picking up another voice, softer than the others, as if it was whispered into an old microphone. 1962. It began, the voice trailing off into a crackle that sounded almost like laughter. Then came the sound of something knocking softly, almost imperceptibly, against a wall in the distance. I froze, feeling the chill of the late hour wrap around me as my parents listened, their faces paler than ever. The voices faded out, but not before the baby monitor picked up another whisper, more urgent this time. 1962. The last sound was a sharp knock against the wall again. It echoed in the silence that followed, chilling and unresolved. My mother stared into my father's eyes, both of them locked in a mutual horror that said no words were necessary. I didn't know what to do next but hoped the monitor would turn off on its own, eager for it to end. Instead, it seemed the static had taken hold, insisting on airing this broadcast over and over again. The baby monitor kept picking up that same voice, repeating 1962, with each knock until I wondered if the house itself was alive, haunted by some unspoken memory. At 3:15 a.m., Sarah stared blankly at her cell phone, the screen glowing like a beacon in the darkness. The time had passed so slowly since she'd set the alarm an hour earlier to ensure she was up early enough to check on the new voicemail notification. Her heart raced as she tapped play. The sound of a deep male voice filled the room, resonating in her chest with its familiar timbre. "Hi, sis," he said. His breath seemed to come in long, slow gasps. "Sorry I couldn't be there for your brother's birthday last week. You remember that day? All those years ago, right?" Sarah nodded, though no one was around to see her. Her brother had died 2 weeks earlier and the anniversary of his birth was just days away. The call from home caught her off guard. "Everything okay with you?" he asked. "I know it's been tough. I'm sorry to even call at 3 a.m., but I feel like you need to hear this." Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the lump in her throat. "It's fine, Nikki," she said, forcing herself not to shiver. "What is it?" He took a deep breath before speaking again, his voice suddenly more serious. "Mum and Dad called me. I don't know how they knew you had my number, but something happened today. It doesn't make sense." A pause followed, thick with unspoken fear. "They called around 3:06 p.m., Nikki continued in a low whisper, "and said you picked up the phone, but you didn't talk back." Sarah's eyes widened as she listened to his words. A chill ran down her spine. She remembered clearly answering the call, hadn't she? And then there was another call around 3:27 p.m. Nikki went on, "And they heard you cry out a little, but it didn't sound like it was you." Sarah's mind raced, each word of his explanation pushing her closer to a realization that sent shivers through her. "You're not sure who made those calls?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm not sure at all," Nikki replied, his voice growing distant and hollow. "They kept telling me it was weird, as if I should know you wouldn't cry out like that." A silence crept in as Sarah tried to piece everything together. What did this mean? Was someone, no, something taking her place? "Nikki, what happened?" she whispered into the phone. "I don't know," he said, his voice fading as if he was turning away from the call. "They're back and I'm scared. They said you need to be ready when they come for me next." As the last echoes of his words faded, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The voicemail ended abruptly, leaving behind a lingering emptiness that seemed to vibrate through the air. A year had passed since her brother's passing, but tonight, as the clock ticked silently on, she felt him watching from beyond. And now he was calling again. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me. The next one is worse." The phone in my apartment was old and rattly. Its battery was weak. A faint beeping sound pulsed between calls. At 3 a.m., I knew I shouldn't be calling radio stations, but sometimes, when your shift ends at midnight and you're too worn out to find the bed, a voice can lift you up. "Midnight Frequency," answered the host's deep, calm tone. I hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "My name is Mike. I was driving on Route 66 between Amarillo and El Paso last night when I heard this station. It sounded like it was back in 1988. Silence. Then he said softly, "Go on, Mike." "Okay," I began hesitantly. "It's a little strange. You see, in 1988, there wasn't any FM station broadcasting that late at night. All the AM stations were shut down by then for a new citywide FM network. But my car radio found this one. A live feed. I remember hearing an old DJ. Probably early morning. The static was thick as a blanket. Every few seconds, it would fade away before popping back to a scratchy hiss. It wasn't the smooth announcers of today. I could hear him breathing, almost like he was sitting right next to me. And I paused for emphasis. He played this song, Sweet Home Alabama. It was weird. That wasn't exactly their vibe. I swallowed hard as I relived the moment. In a city full of late-night truck stops and fast food joints, it felt almost intimate, like he knew where you were. His voice was rough from years of smoke, like a man who'd been awake for way too long. I turned off the highway, just to see if I could get something on this non-existent station. I continued. I found an old house near the edge. It looked abandoned but had that faint static pattern inside. It went silent by 1 a.m. like it was supposed to. Mike's voice crackled with curiosity. Did you ever return there? Not exactly, I admitted quietly. By morning, everything was gone. The station, the old house, nothing. Just like it never existed. Have you tried finding out more about it? He asked. No, I replied. I didn't want to know if it was real or just some kind of trick. The host's voice deepened, almost a warning. Mike, do you believe in the unseen? I hesitated, feeling a chill creep up my spine. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe that's what happens when the radio goes off air for good, he said with a tone of finality. The static began to build until it drowned out everything but Mike's voice, now distant and unsteady. Thanks for calling, Mike. Before I could say goodbye, there was nothing but the faint buzzing of the receiver, as if cut off mid-sentence. The phone in my hand went dead. The first time I heard my own voice on that cassette, I was at a charity garage sale on the edge of town. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a strange shade of pink as if the stars were reluctant to come out early. I wandered past stacks of vinyl, DVDs, and tattered books, eyeing them like they might vanish before I could claim them. It was then that I noticed it, a small, brown cassette tape tucked between two worn leather binders. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed it, feeling something in my gut tell me to bring it home. As soon as I hit the front steps of my old apartment building, I slipped the tape into the Walkman and pressed play. The static hissed and crackled for a few moments before settling on a clear voice that was unmistakably mine. But it wasn't just any voice. It was my 23-year-old self, as if recorded in 1987. The cassette started softly. Hey Roswell, it's Ben. I found this cassette and I'm recording some thoughts on it because something weird is going to happen tomorrow. The tape had a slight echo, making his voice sound distant like the past speaking from another realm. I sat there, dumbfounded as the words sank in. Tomorrow? I looked at my watch. It was 8 o'clock. Today wasn't over yet, or so it felt. But here was me, giving advice to myself. Warning about something that had happened or was going to happen. The host of the Midnight Frequency paused for a moment, letting the chill settle in. The static hummed as he continued. And I want you to know, you must never, ever, touch the third song on side B, it's cursed. Trust me, just don't. His voice trailed off into silence. I tried to shake it off but couldn't ignore what the words implied. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the tape, eager and wary, but when I reached the third song on side B, something about it felt different. It was a strange feeling, a whisper that tugged at my memory, almost like I had already experienced it, or maybe I had. The last words I heard were, and don't forget to come back here and check this tape tomorrow night if you get the chance. As the song ended, the static returned in full force. My heart pounded as I considered his warning. Why would a 23-year-old version of me be giving advice about something so ominous? And why? Oh, why did it feel like he was speaking to someone who wasn't myself at all? With trembling hands, I paused the tape and flipped it over. The label on side B read "Do not rewind." I shuddered as I realized what it meant. That if I rewound this, I might erase something important. Or worse. The tape clicked to life once more, and my 23-year-old self's voice echoed again. And you better not. The call came in at 3:30 in the morning. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the speaker, a thin static sound between words. This is Macon 911. Do you have any information to share? The room was dimly lit by an overhead light that flickered as if it were alive. The caller hesitated before responding. Yes, she whispered, Her voice barely audible over the hum of the phone. It's 536 Westview Drive. Do you require assistance? Ma'am, the dispatcher asked, her tone patient but alert. I heard something, the woman replied in a shaky voice. A few minutes ago, I heard the phone ring. The dial tone of an old landline echoed through the receiver. The caller's breaths grew shallow, each one heavier than the last. I dialed 911 because it was an emergency number and it sounded different. It sounded like an alarm but not really, she explained, her words trailing off as if she were remembering too much. I'm scared to go inside. Do you live there? The dispatcher pressed. No, the woman's voice was a whisper now, barely more than a breath in the dark of night. But my daughter used to, and there's something not right. It's been years since she moved out, but she paused for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts or courage. When she spoke again, it was as if the words themselves were dragging her voice down. The house burned down, she said, her words slow and deliberate. Years ago, but I keep hearing that phone ring. And tonight, the line went dead abruptly, leaving only the sibilant static of an abandoned airwave. The dispatcher cleared her throat and repeated, "This is Macon 911. Do you have any information to share?" No answer. I hung up the phone with a quiet click, my fingers trembling slightly. The house was just on the other side of the highway, a shadowy mass illuminated by distant streetlights. I could almost make out an old oak tree in the front yard, but even as I considered heading over, something stopped me, some primal instinct that told me this might be better left undisturbed. I stepped back onto the road and started my car, but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet around me. The air was crisp with an early summer chill. My headlights reflected off the empty highway, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. I decided not to go. Not tonight. Not in this hour when the world seemed most silent and strange. I drove back toward the city instead, pulling onto the main road that wound its way through Macon's sleepy suburbs. But as I accelerated, a single image lingered in my mind, those old Westview Drive lights flickering in the distance, like an unseen beacon calling out into the night. The midnight air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and old asphalt, the kind that clung to your skin like an unwanted layer. It was 2 a.m., and Jim Lockhart had just finished his late shift at the diner. He slumped into the driver's seat of his car, which smelled faintly of bacon and coffee, a comforting scent after hours of hearing only static on the radio. Jim had called the midnight frequency, looking for some distraction from his solitary night drive home to Wheeling. Instead, he got a story that seemed too eerie even for this late hour. As the DJ's voice faded out, Jim heard something else, an odd, familiar melody coming from nowhere, playing in just one ear. He pinched it shut but still felt the tune echo inside him. It started as a soft, melancholic piano riff. He recognized it vaguely from somewhere. His sister had once mentioned hearing it on an old song she'd forgotten about. Jim leaned into the radio more, trying to make out if any station was broadcasting the tune. But all he heard was static and his own heartbeat. Jim pulled over at an abandoned service station off the highway. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because the building was empty, or perhaps just the presence of a structure on this desolate stretch of road. He grabbed a pen from his glove compartment and began scribbling down the notes he heard, trying to keep track. The melody took shape, a sorrowful tune with words that seemed to shift in meaning when read aloud, like it was playing a trick on him. The lyrics, or what he could make out of them, spoke of a haunted place, a ghost's plea for help. Jim felt his heart rate increase as the song repeated itself over and over, almost hypnotic. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him from the dark windows of the service station. His flashlight beam flickered across broken glass and rusted oil drums, but found nothing that could have created such a persistent tune. Just when Jim thought he might lose his grip on reality, the melody changed. The piano notes grew louder, more insistent, until they filled the whole car. It was as if the song had gained its own will and was driving itself into Jim's mind. In an attempt to break free, Jim slammed down on the gas, gunning the engine of his old pickup truck. He roared past the service station, heading deeper into the night. But wherever he drove, the music followed. It seemed to be singing about a place, someplace familiar yet terrifyingly unknown. The road stretched out ahead like an endless black ribbon, and Jim could only imagine where it led. He knew that the song's melody had taken on a life of its own, echoing in his head, driving him closer to whatever lay hidden at the end of this path. You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are. The static crackled over the airwaves like a breathless whisper in the dark. Good evening. The deep voice of the midnight host began, his tone calm yet carrying an undercurrent of unease. This is Midnight Frequency. We are here for those who seek answers in the unexplained. Tonight, we bring you a story from our listener, Sarah. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she spoke into the microphone, her words barely audible over the hum of the radio station. It was just after midnight on the 14th of February. I couldn't sleep, and the night guard job had me in that endless loop between boredom and dread. She paused for a moment, gathering herself. There were no other residents left in this old Victorian house where I worked. The once bustling office was now empty, save for a few dusty filing cabinets and the ticking of an ancient clock on the wall. But tonight, something felt different. A chill had settled over the place, making my skin crawl. Sarah shivered ever so slightly. The building's intercom system should be silent after hours, but it started whispering. The PA announced it as if someone else was using it. Soft voices barely audible, almost like a muffled sigh. I leaned in closer to the intercom, listening intently. The host paused, letting Sarah's voice build tension. The first name came through faintly, whispered across the intercom like a spectral presence. It was John, a former maintenance worker who passed away last month. His name echoed softly, then fell silent again. I dismissed it as a glitch or my imagination running wild. A long pause hung in the air, thick with tension. But soon after, another name drifted through Lily, a young woman who had lived here before me, passing away not too long ago. Her name made me jump. She was only gone for 6 months. The whispers grew more frequent and insistent. I felt a weight settle over the room. The host's voice dropped to a hushed whisper as Sarah recounted. Then came the unexpected. Names of people who had died years before, buried in forgotten tales of this old house. My heart pounded in my chest, each name like a cold hand gripping my soul. It was unnerving, this unexplained presence. But it wasn't over yet. A sharp intake of breath from Sarah. The worst part came late that night. The PA announced the names one by one, faster and more urgent until only one remained. Emily, who had passed away decades ago, her death shrouded in mystery. Her name lingered for a moment before silence fell, an eerie quiet that seemed to go on forever. Sarah's voice grew shaky. I rushed through the empty halls, searching for the source of those haunting whispers. But everything looked normal, no trace of anyone or anything out of place. Just me and the relentless tick-tock of time, and my own racing heart. I hung up the phone, feeling a chill that went right to the core. The host's voice trailed off into silence as Sarah's story faded away. "Who are you listening for tonight?" the midnight host asked softly, his words echoing the chilling atmosphere Sarah had just described. The midnight host's low voice cuts through the static of the old, weathered radio. "Good evening. My name is James, and you're tuned into the Midnight Frequency. This late night, I'm going to take a listen to something that was called in by Mrs. Eliza Whitmore from Charleston, South Carolina." A silence stretches as the host glances at his notes, then resumes with deliberate slowness. "I spoke with Mrs. Whitmore on a clear, moonless evening. Her voice carries a faint tremor, almost as if she's sitting in her old living room, clutching an ancient corded phone. "Mr. James," she begins, "I have something I need to tell you about." Her words are hesitant, unsure. It's about a recording that started aging before my very eyes. James leans back and adjusts the microphone, Eliza mentioned she used to work night shifts at an old warehouse on Dock Street, near the docks where ships unloaded their cargo under moonlit skies. Every night, her duties were routine: checking stock, ensuring the doors closed tight after a hard day's work. On one particular night, perhaps it was the eve of a full moon, Eliza noticed something peculiar. In an old office cubicle, there was an ancient tape recorder. She didn't give it much thought until she found a small cassette inside. The label said, "Confession." Curiosity piqued. Eliza brought the tape home and placed it on her living room speaker. It began as a whim. She played the tape once, twice. Each time, the voice was calm, almost soothing. "I did wrong," the voice stated clearly. But with each subsequent play, the voice aged, its timbre deepening and weakening. By the third listen, it seemed to come from an old man, a gravelly whisper barely holding on. Eliza was startled but intrigued. She played the tape again, this time more out of habit than curiosity. As she hit replay, the voice began to age again. With each play, the speed slowed, and the quality deteriorated. By the end of that week, it sounded like a whisper from beyond. I asked Mrs. Whitmore about her feelings. Did she think there was something wrong with the tape? She hesitated before responding. "It's not just the voice that ages every time I play this. The whole house feels older too." Her tone is weary, tired of the nightly ritual. Tonight, Eliza played it again. The voice was almost indiscernible now. As she stepped back to let the tape run its course, her eyes darted around the room as if she expected something, or someone to appear. "It's the same person," she whispered. "The one who knows what I did wrong." James pauses for a moment, allowing the tension to build before continuing. The next day, Eliza brought the tape back to the warehouse. She left it playing in that old office as if she was hoping someone, or something, would answer. The voice never responded, but there was one more thing. Every time anyone touched or moved anything in the room after the tape played, objects would shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if they were aging too. Tonight, Mrs. Whitmore called to tell me that when she returned the cassette, it was noticeably smaller. She opened her bag and showed me. Yes, there had been a change. The age of the voice on tape seemed to be linked to something beyond the physical world. James pauses again, knowing the listener is hanging by a thread. "The worst part," Eliza says, "is she can't unplug it now. The recorded voice plays every night at midnight. Each night, it gets a little older and her house feels slightly more ancient. The host's voice fades to silence as static envelops the air. And then, just before the final crackling ends, and tonight, I wonder if anyone will ever know why." In the quiet of that late July night in Flagstaff, Arizona, the only sounds were those of distant cicadas and the hum of the air conditioner. I was working the night shift at my job as a mechanic, an endless loop of tires being changed and oil being drained, until I saw something peculiar on the old-fashioned payphone outside. The payphone, that old relic from another era, was usually silent, its glass door fogged up from years of neglect. But tonight, the phone box was clear, and as I walked over to take a closer look, I noticed what looked like someone had left a piece of paper on it, a crumpled up receipt, almost invisible against the blackened walls. As my flashlight beam swept across it, I saw what appeared to be someone's name scrawled in ink. Tommy. I felt an odd shiver run down my spine. Tommy had been my old friend from way back when we used to explore the spooky old houses around town. He'd moved away long ago, his whereabouts unknown even to me. The name on that receipt was just too familiar, too personal. Curiosity getting the better of me, I went inside and dialed the number. After several rings, it clicked into life, a tinny voice asking for change. Before I could insert any coins, my hand hovered over the slot, something in the receiver's tone making me pause. It was almost like it knew who I was. I finally dropped a quarter and picked up the phone. "Hello," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tommy," came the reply, so clear it might have been just inches from the other end of the line. "It's good to hear you." My pulse quickened. A chill crept up my neck. This wasn't just a simple phone call. Something was off. The caller knew my name before I even picked up. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy, it's been too long," the voice repeated, almost as if echoing within itself. "We need to talk." I hesitated, unsure about what kind of conversation would come next. The payphone box seemed to loom larger in the darkened alley, the shadows dancing on its walls like they were alive. "Where are you?" I managed to choke out. "I'm not far," the voice replied. "Just down the street." I put my hand over the receiver, hoping someone might hear me through the open door of the mechanic's shop. But there was nothing but static and the hum of the air conditioner. "I don't know if you can see this, Tommy," I said into the phone, trying to find a way out. "But I'm here now." I heard a sigh from the other end, almost as if it was content with my silence. The call then faded away, leaving me standing there alone in the alley, holding the receiver, staring at the name on that crumpled up receipt. And just like that, the phone started ringing again. The static seethed from the radio speaker like a hissing serpent. I cradled the CB microphone with my calloused hand and scanned the dusty interior of the truck, looking for any sign that something had changed. Barstow was usually quiet at 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday night, but tonight, it felt different. My name tag read Eli under the sticker "Home for Christmas." I flipped the switch to channel 19 and heard only static. "Hey, anyone there?" I called out into the void. The static crackled back at me, almost as if someone had forgotten to turn off a breaker. That was when I noticed it. The dial stuck on 19. No one uses that channel. Not really. A few years ago, it got hacked by some pranksters who made ghost sounds, creepy howls and whispers, and they stopped just as suddenly as they began. I leaned closer to the microphone, my breath misting up the cold glass. I pressed the transmit button again. "Hello," the static hissed and swelled until it seemed almost alive, like a conversation in another room gone wrong. Then, it retreated into silence, a moment of eerie calm that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at the dial one more time, confirming what I already suspected. It hadn't moved from 19 since I turned on the radio. Was this some kind of prank? Or was something else at play? Curiosity gripped me as much as fear. My fingers trembled slightly, but I knew better than to quit now. I clicked through several channels. Nothing. Barstow was empty, just like always. But something about that one stuck channel made my skin prickle. I leaned in closer, the radio's harsh light illuminating a small puddle of water on the ground near the truck's controls. It wasn't much, a few drips, but it shouldn't be there at all, not after a dry summer. The static began to whisper again, and I found myself ignoring its warning. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" The radio crackled louder than ever now, as if an audience had just materialized. A soft voice seemed to resonate from the speakers, a human voice, faint but clear. "Eli." My heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" I demanded. But before I could get another word in, the voice dissolved into static and then nothing at all. The radio went completely silent. I stared blankly at the screen, trying to process what had just happened, but my brain refused to make sense of it. I checked the dial again. Still on 19. I felt as if I were trapped in a nightmare where everything was out of place and nothing was quite right. The truck's cold interior closed around me like an uninvited hug. Suddenly, my phone rang. It startled me so much that for a second, I didn't know how to react. My hand shook as I fumbled with the receiver, bringing it to my ear. "Hello," I managed to say. "Are you still on channel 19? The voice was deeper than before, more urgent, and unmistakably human. "Yes," I replied hoarsely. There were no words exchanged for what felt like an eternity, just that single question hanging between us. Then, the line went dead again. The radio went dark, and my phone dropped from my hand as if I'd been jolted by a shock. Everything was still, except for the faint drip of water on the floor, mocking me with its eerie persistence. I sat in the truck's cab, the only sound the relentless static and the drop of water, and somewhere out there, someone, or something was watching. This next call came in just after 3. The hour they say the veil is thinnest. The static was an unwelcome symphony, crackling and bleeding into the space between the radio host's gentle voice. I sat on my grandmother's old leather sofa, my legs tucked under me as if in a cocoon. "This is the midnight frequency," his gravelly tone whispered across the airwaves. "We have a call from Duluth." "Hello?" I asked, my voice barely over a murmur. There was a pause. Then, "Good evening." So the host's voice had an unsettling warmth to it, almost as if he knew exactly what to say. "Tonight, we're sharing something rather extraordinary. It's our answering service for the deceased." I scoffed softly, but then the phone line seemed to shiver with static before a new voice spoke. "My name is Bill," said the caller, his tone so earnest it made my skin prickle. "I don't know how or why I got this number, but they're there every night. The ones who aren't here." Bill's words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The host continued, his voice steady. "Now, Bill, tell us your story." The dial tone was erratic, like it was trying to escape the receiver. "It started about 2 years ago," Bill began. "I used to work night shifts in an old warehouse just outside of town. It was a quiet place by day, but at night, well, something wasn't right." Bill paused for what felt like minutes, and I could hear the static grow louder as if it were whispering secrets. "I thought I was going insane," he admitted quietly. "But one night, the phone rang. It was late, after midnight, and there was no one in the building. Just me." I clutched the receiver tighter, feeling a chill creep up my spine. The static made the air around me seem thicker, heavier. "Bill," the host prompted gently. My wife picked it up. It was just a standard answering machine. But when she hung up, I could hear something on the line. Bill's voice grew more intense. It sounded like someone whispering, "Leave this number." I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight. The dial tone seemed to grow louder now, almost as if it were mocking me. "The next night," Bill continued, his voice barely audible over the static, "it rang again. I didn't know how or why she got that call, but something about it was wrong." The host's voice softened. "And what happened, Bill?" I asked her. "Who said anything?" He said with a laugh that sounded hollow and distant. "She couldn't remember anything, but every night for the next year, someone left a message on that answering machine." Bill's story was building like a dark cloud, heavy and oppressive. The static was almost a companion now, as if it were breathing in unison with Bill. "That's when I started to listen to them," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "They never said much, just one name. Every night the same name, sometimes followed by 'Leave this number.'" I leaned forward, my heart pounding. The dial tone was becoming a constant hum, filling the silence that hung between us. "One night," Bill whispered, "it was different." And then he was gone. The line went dead, the static swallowing his words and leaving me alone in the quiet of the old house. The host's voice floated back into my ear, soft and steady. "Stay with us tonight. I'll be right here until we get an answer." The dial tone echoed in the silence, heavy and oppressive. I knew what was coming, but there was still a moment where I could pretend it wasn't real. And then, I heard it, a whisper, faint and distant. It seemed to come from all around me, like the static had finally found its voice. "Leave this number," the whisper rasped, before fading away into the darkness. The line went dead again, leaving me alone with the chill of the night and the unsettling assurance that I was not the only one who could hear. The phone rang 3 times before I decided to pick up. I leaned back against my old leather chair and dialed the number of my cousin Patricia. We hadn't spoken much since she moved away after college, but every so often, our paths would cross. The static on the line was faint, like a distant radio station during a storm. "Patricia, are you there?" I whispered into the receiver, hoping for her familiar voice to cut through the crackling noise. Instead, a low hum filled the room, something otherworldly and unsettling. It sounded as if someone had left a recording device on the nightstand, one set to capture the mundane moments of an empty house. The hum continued, growing louder until it became almost deafening. I hung up the receiver and turned in my chair to look out the window. The dark silhouette of Salem's historic brick houses loomed outside, each with a story buried beneath its old wood and stone facades. My heart pounded as I reached for the telephone again. "Hello," I called softly, but there was no response from the other end. Instead, a disembodied voice began speaking in my ear, barely audible over the hum. "Did you forget about your promise to visit? You were supposed to come see me. Remember?" The voice sounded like Patricia's, childish and high-pitched. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my mind of the static interference. "Remember that time we got stuck in a blizzard last winter?" The recording seemed to shift, altering its pitch and speed mid-sentence as if the speaker were moving closer or further away. "Come on, cousin. Let's go out for ice cream. You're late." The voice taunted. Still not my cousin's. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the chair. The hum grew louder, almost painful in its intensity now. I fumbled through my memories, searching desperately for a foothold in this disorienting auditory landscape. "Patricia? Patricia? Are you still there?" More voices began to fill the line. Other people I knew but never expected to hear. "Where have you been, Salem? You're forgetting your part," they murmured. The hum reached a crescendo, and then abruptly, silence. The room was suddenly empty again, save for my pounding heart and the lingering static of the phone. I tried to hang up, but something, perhaps the recording device, was preventing me from disconnecting. My hand trembled as I pressed the receiver against the mouthpiece. "Stop!" I screamed into the silence, and then a new voice filled the air, so cold it seemed to seep through every fiber of my being. "Do you ever think about what might be waiting for you at night?" In the dark it was Patricia's voice again, but this time she didn't laugh or taunt. She sounded genuinely concerned, as if she were afraid for me. That's when I realized the worst was yet to come. The phone in the small diner of Gary's Diner and Grill was still ringing at 3 a.m., a lonely noise cutting through the hush of my night shift. I glanced at it warily, knowing full well the diner was empty save for myself and the ghost that occasionally lingered here. But tonight, there was no such presence. I had never heard this number before. "Hello? Gary's Diner," I answered into the silence, my voice a whisper against the hum of the old radio still blaring in the background. It wasn't until I heard the voice that I realized how wrong everything felt. It was a man, calm but hesitant, his words slurring slightly as if he were drunk or just extremely tired. "Hi. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I need to tell someone. I'm in North Bend, South Dakota." A small wrongness settled over the air like fog. I should have asked for a name, but his voice was too raw and urgent. "I just got off work. Told my boss he could find another replacement when the graveyard shift ends." My mind raced through possibilities, trying to make sense of it all. The graveyard shift ended at midnight in North Bend, and why would someone call from there so late? And this place, I've never seen anything like it before. It's not a bar or a cafe, just these old buildings on the edge of town, dark and empty. The coldness started to seep into my bones, a tangible chill that seemed to come from beyond the phone line. It was quiet, so fucking quiet in there, and then I heard it, a whispering voice, telling me where to go. My hands tightened around the microphone, fingers turning white. How did he find us? No one knew about these calls. I couldn't get back out of that place. It wouldn't let me. I tried and tried. The doors wouldn't open. A sharp intake of breath from him, followed by a choked whisper. And then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming towards me. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat echoing through the diner. Was he okay? How could I help? I ran down that empty hallway, tried to get away, but something was following me. It was too dark, too quiet. His voice broke, a thin line of panic slicing through the connection. Then it grabbed my coat, sounded like someone coughing, like they were trying not to laugh. A heavy silence followed. The static on the line began to hum louder, almost like it was trying to drown out his cries for help. I don't know what happened after that, I woke up back at work, drenched in sweat. Didn't remember how I got there. A soft thud came through the receiver. A door slamming shut. Or maybe a slap of flesh against another? Please tell me, is anyone listening out there, he asked, his voice barely a breath. The diner clock struck 3 times, each chime seeming to resonate in my chest. The radio went static again, and for a moment, it felt like the world had paused just for this man's call. But then, before I could say anything, the line went dead, and with it, an eerie silence that left me trembling, holding onto the microphone as if it might save me from the darkness that now seemed to press in from all sides. And so, as Gary's Diner and Grill stood empty and still at 3 a.m., I wondered, what was waiting for the next caller? The static hissed and crackled as John dialed into the midnight frequency. The night was unusually quiet in Oxford, Mississippi. Only the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the air. John's fingers trembled around the receiver, the room growing colder with each second he waited for a connection. Hello? Hello, his voice echoed slightly as he repeated into the receiver. The host on the midnight frequency finally answered. Good evening, Mr. Clark. What seems to be troubling you tonight? John took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the dimly lit bedroom. The flickering light from the bedside lamp cast long shadows that danced unsettlingly across the walls. I have something I need to share, John said, almost inaudibly. Of course, Mr. Clark, the host replied calmly. You can speak freely. John cleared his throat and began. It started one evening last month, just after my shift ended at the old paper mill. I had an early night and was walking home when this song came on clear as day through a vent right above me. A shiver ran down John's spine, and he glanced towards the ceiling. Can you tell us more about that? The host prompted gently. I was out for my usual walk around Oxford Square. The place is quiet at night. Most people are already tucked in by this time. But when I got to the paper mill, something didn't feel right. It was as if the buildings themselves were watching me. John paused, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Then I heard it, a song, soft and sweet, like someone singing from inside the building itself. But there was no one else around, just me and the empty streets. The host listened intently. And what did you make of this? It sounded almost familiar, like a hymn or maybe an old gospel song. And then it started to change. Get louder. John's voice dropped lower as he recounted what happened next. It was like the air itself began to hum with sound. The tune grew in intensity, filling my ears and overwhelming me. It echoed through the vents, up and down the old mill's empty corridors, even under the floorboards of my apartment. The host interjected smoothly. And did you manage to follow this? John shook his head slowly, his eyes locked on a single spot on the wall. I tried to go back there, but it was like something had taken control. I kept hearing those notes, coming from every direction. Did anything else happen that night? John hesitated for a moment before speaking. Late into the night, after my shift, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and heard it again. A soft singing, rising through the vents, like someone was trying to communicate with me. The host's voice was filled with genuine interest. That is quite unsettling, Mr. Clark. I know, John said softly, but that's not all. The next day, I noticed the vents were slightly open near my bed. That couldn't be a coincidence. There was a moment of silence on the line before the host asked, and what did you find inside? John's voice grew strained as he spoke. In one of those vents, there was something paper. Torn pieces of paper with writing on them, in my own handwriting. The host took a deep breath. Can you describe this? It looked like fragments from an old hymnal. Just lines and lines of words I've never really paid attention to before. The host's voice softened but remained firm. That sounds very strange indeed, Mr. Clark. Yes, John said hoarsely. But what's more, what's even stranger, is that whenever I hear the song again, those pieces of paper seem to disappear and reappear in the vent. Can you imagine? The host mused quietly. I can't. It feels like someone is trying to reach me through something as mundane as my own home. The static in the background grew louder, almost mocking John's fear. "That's all I wanted to share," he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for your courage and honesty, Mr. Clark," the host said warmly before adding, "Your story is quite chilling indeed." John hung up, but the vent in his bedroom continued to hum softly, just as it had that night months ago, waiting to see what it would whisper next. "If you're still with us, good." A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. The number station began its broadcast just as Mark was driving home from his night shift at the hospital. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, the radio static crackling like a bad storm. The empty highway stretched out into the darkness ahead of him, and the old house by the side of the road seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. It started innocently enough. Some muffled voices in Russian, a soft hum, then a stream of numbers scrolling across his car's radio screen. Mark hadn't paid much attention until he heard the number 1,354,768,092, and his heart skipped a beat. That was his phone number from high school, when he used to text his girlfriend, Sarah, every night after curfew before their world had shattered. He tried tuning it out but couldn't ignore the way the numbers kept appearing. 1,354,768,092, then 1966, the year they graduated, 04/10, the date of his first breakup with Sarah. The numbers seemed to move at their own will, each time more jarring. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, and it read 3:58 a.m., just like every night he'd lost Sarah in those long ago hours. The static intensified as the numbers shifted to dates from his childhood, when his parents were alive. Then they appeared in sequence. 02/16, 11/03, 04/27. Mark pulled over into a deserted service area on the side of the highway, trying to make sense of it all. The numbers kept appearing. 8/09, the night his father had died, and 05/12. His mother's last day alive. They continued, each one more personal than the last, until they reached an unsettling pause. "Why are you doing this?" Mark whispered to no one, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The numbers started again, but this time they were different numbers that didn't exist. Or so he thought. 4,532,987,610. 2,563,198,421. And then came a sequence of dates. 09/25, the day his sister moved away. 10/15, the day she died in a car accident. The number station paused again, leaving Mark feeling raw and exposed. Suddenly, it resumed with an ominous rhythm, numbers cascading rapidly across the screen, each one more chilling than the last. 7,894,562,301, 9,978,765,432, 8,276,543,109. The static hissed louder as if a storm was brewing. Mark's breath hitched in his chest. He knew he should turn the radio off, but he couldn't. Not now. They were numbers that matched every date that ever mattered to him. The number station was reading his life, and it wasn't stopping. The final number appeared on the screen, 14/05, and it stayed there, frozen in an unyielding silence. Mark shivered as he realized this was only just beginning. In the quiet of a small Nebraska town on an October night, Sarah's phone vibrated softly. She leaned forward in her swivel chair at the diner, squinting at the screen with half-closed eyes. The room was dim, illuminated by the soft glow of monitors and the muted hum of the coffee machine. Outside, the wind carried a chill that seemed to seep into the thick carpet and the worn leather seats. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again, a voice message alert. Sarah paused, feeling a sudden, cold weight settle over her shoulders. She hesitated for a moment before pressing play. Sarah, a man's voice began, gravelly and urgent. I've got to tell you something. You'll thank me later. The static hissed softly in the background, as if the phone itself was trying to break away from its message. Sarah's heart raced, a fluttering sensation that felt like tiny birds inside her chest. Why had she never heard this before? How could someone have left this on her voicemail hours ago? Listen carefully, the man continued. Tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. The old Millville Bridge. It's going to be awful. The voice paused, and Sarah could almost hear the man taking a deep breath. You need to get out of there. Something bad is going to happen. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the message. Why would anyone know this? And who was behind it? She scrolled through her recent calls, trying to find a connection. There were no missed calls from Millville or any unfamiliar numbers. She hit play again, listening intently but unable to decipher much more of the man's words. A sudden noise, a loud thump, echoed from the kitchen, snapping Sarah back to reality. She quickly ended the call and leaned her head against the cool glass window behind her desk. At 7:30 p.m., she stood at the edge of town, watching as the last light faded over the bridge. The old Millville Bridge was a relic of better times, with its rusting metal and towering pillars that seemed to loom over the small creek running beneath it. A chill washed over Sarah, and she shivered, hugging herself tightly against the night air. As the clock struck 7, her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message. 7:30 Bridge. Her hand instinctively reached for the message, but when she looked up, her breath hitched. The phone was still in her pocket, undisturbed. She turned to look at the bridge once more. The sky darkened, casting long shadows over the water, and Sarah felt an unease building within her. A car began slowing down as it approached the bridge from one end. It seemed unusually slow for this time of night, the driver hesitant or perhaps distracted. As the vehicle pulled to a stop at the toll booth, its headlights illuminated the old bridge, and then, a scream pierced the stillness. Sarah turned in horror and watched as the car's lights flickered before going out completely. The engine started again with a loud roar, and the car sped away into the night. Sarah rushed across the bridge, her shoes squeaking on the wet concrete. What had just happened? As she reached the end of the structure, she turned to see if anyone else was there, but the darkness swallowed any witnesses whole. The toll booth stood silent, a ghost in the night. She walked slowly towards the car's final position, her flashlight beam cutting through the fog that began to settle over the bridge. As she approached, something rustled in the bushes beside the road, a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible. Sarah swallowed hard and stepped closer, her breaths coming out in short, quick gasps. The car was no longer there, only a small trail of broken twigs leading into the woods. She followed, her flashlight beam dancing across the trees. Suddenly, she tripped over something solid and fell to the ground. When Sarah sat up, a chill ran down her spine as she saw what had caused her fall, a large wooden cross propping open an old metal gate. Carved into it were crude symbols that made her heart race, symbols of skulls and broken chains. The gate was slightly ajar, leading deep into the woods. She reached out to push the gate closed when it suddenly swung inwards with a loud creaking noise. Sarah froze, her hand stopping midair. A gust of wind howled through the trees, carrying with it an eerie whisper. 7:30 Bridge. The message lingered in the air like a spectral echo. Sarah turned to go back, but the gate was now completely open. She stepped forward into the darkness, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Something bad is going to happen. Those same words repeated in her head, growing louder with each step she took deeper into the woods. At 3:15 a.m., the unmistakable sound of the old rotary dial phone rang in my ear. It was just past the time when I usually drifted off to sleep, but my body had woken on its own, as if responding to some unspoken call. In that moment, my mind wandered back to the forgotten tale that haunted this house, the one about the disconnected line that never seemed truly silent. The phone's ring was a familiar yet eerie reminder of times past. The first 3 rings cut through the silence like a sharp blade, slicing through the thick fog of midnight. I stared at the cradle for a moment, wondering if I had imagined it. But no, there were those 3 rings again. clear and unambiguous. I hesitated for only an instant before picking up the receiver. The phone offered no resistance. My fingers barely brushed the cold plastic as I lifted it to my ear. On the other end was only a dial tone, a hum that resonated through the line, promising connection yet holding back any words or breaths on the other side. I dialed 911, but the operator asked me to wait for a busy signal. That's when I noticed the second oddity. This phone wasn't listed as disconnected in the town directory. It belonged to an old house down the street that hadn't been occupied for years. The line was supposed to be dead, yet here it sat, humming on the wall. The operator connected after what felt like an eternity, and I told her my number. A moment passed before she responded. "Thank you," she said tersely. "I'll transfer your call immediately." While I waited for the transfer, a shiver crawled up my spine as if the room itself was breathing with me. The wall seemed to echo the ringing of the phone, each vibration growing more pronounced. I glanced around the small living room, trying to spot any signs of movement or disturbance. Finally, a voice came through. The dispatcher, no doubt, but instead of soothing questions about an emergency, she asked sharply, "What is your address? Do you need assistance?" I rattled off my address, my voice steady despite the mounting tension. The line crackled with static and silence, each moment stretching into what felt like an age. "Mom," I said, clearing my throat, "do you know if this phone should be working? It's usually disconnected." The dispatcher paused. There was a distinct pause before she replied, her tone sharp and clipped. "This line has been known to ring sometimes, but it shouldn't stay on long." I stared at the receiver, unsure what to do next. A part of me wanted to slam down the phone, end this strange encounter, but another part, perhaps a lingering thread of childhood fear, kept me rooted there. The dispatcher's voice returned. "Quieter now. Are you still there? Do you want us to send someone over?" A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I realized that if this line had been known to ring, it might be because something was listening in. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I hesitated for a moment longer before finally hanging up and looking around the room again. The phone continued its monotonous ring, a ghostly reminder of everything hidden beneath the surface. I could feel eyes watching me, but when I turned to look, there was nothing in the shadows or reflections. The final rings cut through the night like a jagged knife, slicing into my skin. And then, as quickly as they had started, they stopped. The line went dead, leaving only the echo of what had happened hanging heavy in the air. I stood frozen for a moment longer before rushing to the front door and stepping out onto the porch, where I leaned against the cold wood and listened intently into the night. Nothing stirred. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic on an empty highway and the occasional hoot of an owl. Yet, as I turned back toward the house, a chill ran down my spine, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up once more. I'm not sure what to think about that phone or why it rang only when I did. The line was supposed to be dead, but there it sat, humming into an empty night. And now, as I walk away from that house, I can't shake the feeling that something is still there waiting. The night was as still as the grave outside of Sleepy Bend, Oregon. I had dialed in late that Friday afternoon, just before my shift ended at the local diner. The phones usually went dead by this hour, but I pressed on, feeling a strange compulsion to break through the silence. "Hello? Hello," I whispered into the receiver, my voice barely audible over the static. The usual hiss of radio interference crackled back, but something felt different tonight. It was like the static itself was coalescing into words, though they were only whispers at first. "Are you there?" I squinted through the dark, a flicker of doubt dancing across my mind. "Yes," I replied, "but where are you?" The static seemed to swell, growing louder and more coherent. "Are you sure?" it whispered back. "This is only between stations." I shook my head, though no one could see me. "What do you mean? Can't you hear the radio? Can you hear yourself think?" My heart pounded in my chest. That was it, the question I'd been asking myself for years, ever since that night back when my life took a turn so dark and strange. The static hissed again, Back then, it said. Was it just between stations? Or did the world bend its ear to your thoughts? I didn't answer, the fear knotting in my stomach like lead. It was eerie, as if someone, or something was testing me. I couldn't look away from that voice, almost as real as the radio. Tell me, it urged. So I did. Yeah, I stammered back. Then, did your thoughts change anything? I swallowed hard. Maybe they gave you a way in. More static, this time punctuated by odd creaks and groans of old buildings shifting with the chill of night. How close were we? It asked, as if coming closer to the truth. I shivered, my breath visible in the cold air. Close enough, I admitted. But how? Did you ever call out to them again, when they wanted an answer? The voice was louder now, more insistent. It made me squirm under the scrutiny of its words. Only once. And did it matter? It queried. I hesitated. It changed everything. I whispered. What happened next? After that night, there was a pause, then a slow creak from the old diner. A distant car honked somewhere, barely audible. Did you see anything back then? Any sign of them? The voice seemed closer now, almost as if it could be standing right by me. I didn't respond for what felt like an eternity. The static hissed again, a sharp metallic sound that cut through the silence. You must have, the voice said softly, almost apologetic. Back then, the air was thick with tension as I remembered that night. I saw something, I confessed. A figure in the old mill shadow. Another pause, pregnant with meaning. Did they answer your questions? It asked. No, I answered quietly. Not really, but afterwards, things were never the same. What did you do then? The static began to buzz like a hive of bees awakening. I left, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Left that town and everything in it behind. Did they ever come looking for you? The voice pressed. I shook my head, though again, no one could see me. No, I replied with certainty. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. What do you think happened to them? There was a long silence before the static formed a final question. Did you ever wish you hadn't left? Don't touch that dial. Stay with me. The next one is worse. In the quiet of a Georgia night, under the blanket of stars above the Savannah River, I found myself alone with an old, unexplained cassette. It wasn't until my friend Mike dialed in with a bizarre story that I heard something that should never have been recorded at all. Mike was always the life of a party, the guy who told you stories so vivid it felt like you were there. That night, though, his voice on the phone was tense and oddly distant, as if he'd left his body behind. He started talking about an old VHS tape, tucked away in his parents' attic, a family treasure, or rather, a family mystery. Remember that seance we threw last year? Mike's voice crackled softly through the line, the static hinting at the long distance between us. It was supposed to be for fun, but something got out of hand. I squinted in the half light, trying to make sense of his words. What do you mean? It got out of hand? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost as if he were telling me secrets in a forgotten corner. I found the tape last night. Somebody, was on it. His words hung heavily, like thick fog rolling in off the river. A chill crept up my spine. What did you see? I demanded, my fingers tightening around the phone receiver. Mike's breath caught as if he were trying to find the right words. I didn't. But the thing, it was on the tape, he said finally, his voice a mere thread of sound now. The suspense in his silence was almost more than I could bear. Tell me what you saw, I urged him, my mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. He hesitated again, as if struggling to remember. You know how we set up the seance on that old projector? Remember how we placed the tape in front of it so the images would be visible? His voice grew fainter still, and I could almost picture his face now, pale with a tinge of fear. Yes, I replied carefully, trying to keep my calm. What happened next? There was nothing there at first. He began slowly, as if wading through murky water. Then it started moving, but not like the projector itself. It was something else. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Describe it, I demanded urgently. I don't even know how to describe it, he admitted, his voice breaking. It was a face, sort of. It appeared above the image on the screen, just for that 1 second before it jumped back into place. And then, his voice trailed off again, leaving me hanging with an unanswered question. And then what? I pressed. Another pause. And then everything stopped. Mike whispered. The lights went out, and when they came back on, the VHS was completely blank. The tape was useless now, just a relic of something that had never happened in the room at all. My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. What did you do next? I asked, my voice barely more than a murmur. Mike sighed heavily, and for a moment, there was only static before he spoke again. I called the family together, my parents, your sister, everyone. But when we tried to play it back, nothing happened. His voice cracked with fear. It's like whatever was on that tape disappeared. A shiver ran down my spine as I listened, feeling an eerie dread settle in my stomach. The night grew silent, save for the distant creaking of an old house, and the static on the phone line. Mike's voice broke through again, but this time, it sounded like he was far away, almost lost to me. I don't know what to do, he finally admitted, but you have to listen to this tape yourself. It's not real, but it is. His words hung in the air, a warning of something I couldn't quite grasp. And then the line went dead. In the middle of a July night in 1978, something happened to me on an old highway that's been erased from maps. I was driving home from my late shift at the power plant in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. The radio dial slid by with static and scratchy voices until I found a station. The midnight frequency. Its host, calm and steady, promised to play through the night but never offered promises of closure or explanation. My car was a Ford Falcon, a hunk of metal that had seen better days. I rolled down my window, hoping for a breath of cold air, and tried to block out the emptiness outside. The highway was empty too, with an endless sea of salt water ahead under a sky where clouds hung low like thick curtains ready to fall. I tuned into the midnight frequency, and the host began retelling someone's story of finding an old house on the coast. I listened for a while, my head resting against the window, but soon enough, I was drawn back to the radio as the host mentioned something that wasn't supposed to be there. And so, the night went on, and the old lady finally fell asleep, only to wake up in her own body again. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel. The air conditioning stopped working, and a cold draft came from somewhere else entirely. I glanced at my dashboard. It was 2:37 a.m., but the time seemed wrong somehow. The host went silent for a moment as if collecting his thoughts. And then, he continued. There were the broadcasts. Not just any broadcasts. Repeats. Endless loops. Over and over again. The sign-off at 2:15 a.m. was the last piece of normalcy before everything fell apart. A chill ran down my spine, but I focused on the words. But tonight, something different happened. For hours, every time you pressed a button or flicked a switch, the final sign-off played again and again, and good night to everyone who tuned in at 2:15 a.m., and all those left without a signal. A noise, a staticky hum, began to crawl up from my car's speakers. I adjusted the radio, turning it off and back on, but the message kept repeating like a broken record. Now, some say that it's just an old tower broadcasting into the night, but others believe there was something out here beyond their comprehension. The final sign-off was the last broadcast before the silence. I drove faster, trying to escape the sound, but my car wouldn't break free from its hold. A phone on the dashboard rang insistently, yet no one picked up, and so I parked by the roadside, hoping the signal would clear if I simply moved away. But as dawn began to creep over the horizon, the silence grew heavier. The host's voice faded out into a final whisper. For those who believe, be sure to tune in every night at 2:15 a.m. for the midnight frequency, and remember that the last broadcast before the silence plays on. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on, check the locks, and if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night, and sleep with the radio on.